Hey, I wanted to clear up some common misperceptions on doing your yoga practice while you're bleeding. So, one of my students asked me this in the virtual yoga studio. I'm bleeding right now. What should I do? Should I do the practice? Should I not do the practice? And this is an amazing question. So, I wanted to bring it through here for you because through my 15 years of doing yoga and studying with different teachers and doing all the practices, the tantric practices, where they really try to actually reverse their menstrual cycle from doing more earth-based practices where you're just supposed to be at home bleeding into the earth, like everything in between. And I wanted to bring that through for you to share it so that you can decide what is best for you when you are bleeding, and also to just give you a couple of postures that are just so safe and nice to do when you are bleeding. And so the way that I view my menstrual cycle is through the 5 element cycle in Taoism. And so in the 5 element cycle, what is happening when you're bleeding is that you are actually, as a woman, cleansing the 5 organs that move through the 5 element cycle during your bleed. And so as women, we tend to process the emotional world very differently than men. And our cycle is an opportunity for us to clear, right, to release and to let go of the emotions from the previous cycle. So it's essentially like a reset button if you know how to use it well. And so menstruation is very cleansing. It is very clearing. It is, in a lot of what I study is Native American culture, and I go and I participate in a long dance with them on the autumn equinox. And they use the moon tent for the women that are bleeding during this dance that happens overnight as it is a symbol of how they used to do this in their culture, which they would have the moon tent, they would call the red tent, where women would go and bleed together. And what would be happening in that tent is women would become an oracle, right? Because as you're bleeding, you're very open and receptive. And so when I bleed, I find myself connected more into my channel, to my intuition, to what is coming through me. And so culture would use this, old culture would use this as a time for women to have the visions for the tribe. And so it was very revered to be in your blood, right? To be in your bleed. And so when we're going about our life and going about our day, our modern day culture doesn't actually give us space to bleed, right? It is a very structured and masculine society in which, it operates Monday to Sunday. And so as women, we're not on the 24-hour clock, right? Men are, testosterone is. As women, we are on the lunar cycle. And so we rise and fall throughout a whole different time frame than men. And so when you're using this in your day-to-day, in your practice, even if you are living in this modern day world, right, we're looking for ways to balance it so it's not draining our energy or ojas. And so everyone's going to have a different experience with their bleed. And if you are more curious about all of this, I do have an amazing feminine embodiment course. I'll actually link it below because it goes through the 5 element cycle and which organs you're cleansing on each day. So on the first day, it's the kidneys. On the second day, it's the liver. On the third day, it's the heart. On the fourth day, it's the spleen. And on the fifth day, it's the lungs. And so any inconsistency in your blood throughout these 5 days, whether it's more clotting, whether it's darker, whether it's lighter, like blood should just be flowing and like just that bright red color, right? And none of us are going to have a perfect bleed. So don't think that that's the goal. The goal is to use the information that it's giving you to rebalance your organ system and to understand which emotions were more prevalent in your cycle, right? That had a bigger impact on your organs. And then how can you support those organs so that in the next cycle, maybe it's not so big of an issue. And so if you're finding yourself consistently on day 2, angry and frustrated and like there's like so much blood and all of this kind of stuff, this can signify something going on with your liver. And so you really want to learn how to support your liver and use the information from your cycle. And there's a workbook in this course, right? So that you can start to get information from your cycle to participate in your health and your well-being. And so when we approach our bleed, right, it's really important to sit with yourself and understand what your symptoms are, because symptoms are imbalances in your body. We're not meant to have symptoms, right? These are just signals from our body of what's going on. And so whether you're feeling cramping, whether you're feeling like really irritable, whether, your breasts hurt, like these are all hormonal imbalances. And so we're looking to align ourselves to the natural cycles, right? And this is where really understanding the practices to do in your follicular phase, right? When more of your structured energy is online, your ovulation phase, when more of your fertile feminine energy is online, your luteal phase, when more of your crone, inner elder wisdom is drawing within you so that you can have your creativity. And then your blood is the death, right? It's in between the worlds when you're not inhabiting a physical body. And so when you actually learn to move through your whole cycle in this way, understanding when you're ovulating, right? This is a natural fertility method, and understanding your lunar ovulation, because you can potentially ovulate twice in 1 month, right? If you understand these two things and you don't want to get pregnant, you will know what to do to not get pregnant. And if you do want to get pregnant, you'll nail the target. And so a lot of this is really coming back to, not being reliant on birth control and all of these other things that are taking us away from our natural rhythm, that are having harmful effects upon our hormones, upon our cycle. And really what it comes down to is it's having an effect on our entire nervous system, our brain, all of it, because we are not in tune with who we truly are. And so as you're approaching your bleed, and when you really learn the practice, which is why I opened my virtual yoga studio, so that you can understand what poses are good for what poses are good for what organs, what poses are good for what symptoms that your body is displaying, like the physical pains in your body. And so if you're feeling a lot of heaviness in your body, it really serves you to flip yourself upside down. And so, a lot of times, like if we're cramping or if we're feeling heaviness, what we really need to do is to learn how to come onto blocks. And so I love to use wooden blocks. You can use whatever you like, especially when you're bleeding. You might want something softer, like a cork block or a soft block, whatever it is. I like wooden blocks. And so you can simply come down and just lift up your hips onto a block. And it could just be one block. But what this is doing is it's just subtly reversing the flow of all this pressure that you'll feel, right? Because our uterus swells when we're bleeding. And so this just, it's just a really gentle way to like just move that energy away from your womb. And so, and a lot of the Tantra practices, and I don't necessarily agree with this, but a lot of them aimed at learning how to reverse the blood so that they didn't bleed during their cycle. And so it's just up to you what you want to study and what you want to do. But I really believe that understanding the blood and understanding the wisdom that comes through the blood is a really big part of the practice. And so the Tantras would think that the blood was releasing a lot of nutrients, right? And so they didn't want to lose that life force within them. And so I really like to give my blood to my plants. You can do something with it. It can be a ritual for you where you're having a relationship with really what's coming out of you. And so this is where like you don't want to be using tampons, right, that are bleached. You don't want to be using pads that have toxic chemicals in them. You don't want to be using period knickers that have PFAS, PFAS. And so there's all these ways that we can move into a more natural cycle, right, where we can support ourselves and allow ourselves to do what we are meant to do, which is literally bleed when we're bleeding and have more time inside of ourselves. And so when you give yourself the time, even if, you have your job or whatever it is, you can do this after, you can do this before, right? You can just reverse the flow. And so you can start with it really low. I really like to, you can go up against a wall to do this, but to lift my legs up and to just release a lot of the downward flow, because, your period is bringing everything down. It's bringing all of your energy down, whereas ovulation brings all of your energy up. And so if it's feeling like there's too much downward energy, just reverse the flow. And so this is where we really get to use the practice to, shift the intensity our body is feeling, right? This practice is meant to balance us. And so, you really get to find ways, poses that work for you to build your own menstrual practice. And of course, if you don't know how to do that, my feminine embodiment course is so great for that, because I already have practices up for you for each phase of the cycle. But you can also create your own just by understanding how the poses make you feel in your body. And so I don't do a strong muscular approach when I'm bleeding. I don't actually work my muscles when I'm bleeding, because that's the opposite of what you're being asked to do when you bleed, right? It's all about openness, receptivity, right? Think of your dreams, right? Because that's a similar frequency of death, right? It's the in-between. It's when you leave this physical body. And so you're not working the physical body when you're bleeding. What you're working is your more astral bodies or your multidimensional bodies. And so it is really important to close your eyes and go into yourself. And when you're doing this practice, right, it's important to understand, what is it doing for you? How do you feel after? How did this shift things? Because when you start to do that, you'll start to understand when you're feeling like this pose is a benefit. So it's just like using herbs,
right? You do the thing and you see how it made you feel. And if it didn't make you feel better, you throw away the thing, right? You find a different thing. And so it's really about your own inner intuition and how is it feeling in your body. And so this is where no one can tell you what you need, right? I can simply guide you into poses that I like to do, but no one can tell you what you really need until you try it for yourself, right? So that's a really great pose to do when you're bleeding. Another one that I really like to do, especially if I'm feeling like any pressure on my lower back or my pubic bone, is I just come onto hands and knees, and you can use your elbows here. You can just stretch your arms out and you just come into like kind of like this deep table. So a table would be here and you're just walking your hands forward, or if this isn't enough, you can come onto your elbows. Just so, again, you're creating a lot of space in your lower belly, a lot of space in your sacrum, and you can just breathe here. You can make little circles with your pelvis if that feels really good, right? Just to move the energy in your lower body. And so these are just some of just really easy introspective postures that you can do so that you can give yourself the time to turn your senses inward and actually understand what your cycle is showing you, what it's revealing to you, which emotions are overarching in your experience, because that's going to highlight which organ system is stressed out, right? And so this is a really nice way just to open up the whole lower body. And so another one that I really like to do when, because sometimes like your hips will get really sore, right? And so you can come onto a bolster or a block or anything, that feels comfortable for you. Put your feet in bound angle, so soles of the feet together, knees wide. And so I find that this really just helps like the hip joint and the glutes right here when, sometimes the muscles get sore, right? Fatigued when you're bleeding, especially if you overdid it. As women, we tend to overdo it in this masculine-based culture, the overachiever culture. And so our muscles then, when we approach our bleed, are fatigued because they're literally telling us to stop working, right? To stop working so hard. And so this is a really nice one. And when I'm bleeding, I tend to be more mobile in my poses, like movement based, right? And so only go as forward as your pubic bone is tipping down, right? If you're arching your spine here and losing the natural curve of your lower back, this is just going to take you out of your hips and it's not going to be effective, right? So tip your pubic bone forward and walk your hands forward and just shift back and forth. So I really like, I think of bleeding as water, right? It starts with water, the water element, the kidneys, right? It starts with your ancestry, your bones, where you came from, the crystallization of your soul. And so we think of this as like our waters are moving, our waters are rushing. So I really like to bring movement into my practice and just exploring in my body, like where are the tight places? And so when you're working with your cycle more in this intuitive way, I have to say, like, to become intuitive, you have to do the work to become embodied, which is doing your practice, which is turning the outside world off and turning your inner world on, right? Because, intuition is not natural. It's not natural for us in our culture. We actually have to cultivate the space and time to be with ourselves, to understand that, like, I'm going to take 5 to 10 minutes a day for myself. Maybe that turns into an hour. Maybe that turns into 2 hours because it feels so good. Because then when you're walking through life and you're walking through the world, there's no more of this indecision, right? It's just like a clear yes or a clear no. And when you can cultivate this, when you come into your bleed, you become very intuitive about what your body needs, about what it's telling you, right? And so this is where it's really good to have that journal on hand of, okay, what is my day one like? Because if a whole bunch of feelings of fear come up, whether it's fear for your physical safety, your physical security, food, sex, money, water, like always worrying about money, like this is really going to show you where your kidneys are being impacted, where you really don't have this like the willpower, right, that your kidneys need to step forward on this planet and learn how to make money, or like learn how to make money differently. So it's really gets to be a really reflective time for you to understand your deeper wiring, because this wiring is what we're here to reprogram, right? Especially as a soul, you are here to reprogram your wiring because you come in with the specific programming you left with, right, before you left the planet last time. And you come in with that specific energy and you call in the specific experiences that are going to highlight that energy because you're putting it out there, right? And it's coming back to you so that eventually you can say, wow, I keep seeing this happen again and again, right? Pattern, one of the universal laws. What am I going to do to create a new pattern in my life so I'm not constantly calling in this like lack pattern or this fear-based pattern?
And, this can come from your parents, your familial structure, the matrix of society. It can come from past lives. It can come from so many places, but truly it doesn't matter where it came from. What matters is that you choose differently, and you can only choose differently when you look inside of yourself. And so when we bleed, this is the best time to look inside of yourself. It's the best time to get to understand yourself, because those 5 days of your bleed, and you split that up based upon however long you bleed for, are revealing to you certain patterns within your organ system. And through time, through watching your bleed, right, through the months, through the years, you'll come to understand, again, patterns that you see again and again, and then how to shift them. Because if we're always having these feelings of fear coming up, and we know there's something going on with our kidneys, if we don't address it, kidney imbalances happen, kidney stones happen, our hair falls out, right? Because hair is an extension of the kidneys, our bones get brittle, our teeth start breaking, right? And so we really want to learn how to move the current through these organ systems by really knowing, who we are, what we are, the patterns that are rising, the emotions, what organ system the emotions are coming from, and what experiences have been coming back into our life to show us exactly the energy we're putting off into the world. And so it's really powerful, right? Bleeding is very powerful. And so there's a reason that, the female bleed has been repressed, that we've been told to take birth control pills, that it's been shrugged under the rug. Like, I know, however many of you women, like, were you initiated into your bleed, right, in a culture that revered you moving into your womanhood? Or was it like, you just go under the counter and, like, deal with it or whatever, just shrugged it off? And so this is where we really get to reprogram actually the thinking of society, the rituals of society. And if you're a mother with a daughter, how we are raising our daughters, right? And so another thing that you can do, that I really love to do when I'm bleeding, is the more reflective postures. And so these are the longevity poses. And so you can use a bolster under your legs, you can use blocks under your legs. You just want your knees bent so your knees fit into your armpits here, because you don't want to since your cycle is more open, right? When you're bleeding, like, your body is more open, you don't want to actually overstretch in this time either, because then you have more opportunity to overstretch a muscle. And so always use blocks, bolsters, anything under your knees. Make sure your knees stay in your armpits. Don't straighten your legs too much. You can take a block underneath your head like this.
And then just close your eyes and slow down your breath. And so you can set a timer here. I love to do these poses for like 10 to 15 minutes. I set a timer and I measure my breath. So eventually you can get your breath down to about 2 breaths a minute. And so when you slow down your breath like this, you're turning your senses inward, right? You're recalibrating your heart rate. You're recalibrating your nervous system. You're moving into a parasympathetic state, which is what bleed time is, right? You're meant to be more parasympathetic, which is rest, digest, right? You're open, you're receptive, you're receiving experience. And so as we start to slow down the breath, we move out of the stress hormones, right, that give us the imbalances in our cycle. And we turn inwards, right? And we begin to cultivate the more feminine hormones of nurturing ourselves. And so this is a really beautiful pose to do, especially to open up the kidneys on the back. The kidneys tend to ache sometimes when you're bleeding, because blood does take our life force, and our kidneys are our life force. The kidneys are our ojas, right? It's like the juice that we have. And so when we're born, we only get a certain amount of charge. And this is where, in all of the Taoist work, it's all about cultivating your energy so you're not wasting it. So if you're going out and you're partying hard, you're spending all this time like really being detrimental and abandoning your body, you don't get as much time to fulfill what you need to fulfill as a soul on this planet. And so the path, the middle way, is really about learning how to cultivate your energy through life. So, like, if you're bleeding, you're not meant to overwork. You're not meant to be doing much, because this is pulling more of your life force out when already your body is a little bit under stress from having to lose so many nutrients. And so this is where, when we're opening up our kidneys on our back, we're letting the water element flow through our bodies, right? And we're nourishing these more deeper aspects of our upbringing, of how we treat ourselves, how we nurture ourselves. And so forward fold can be a really, really, really nice practice for that, right? Hip work, forward folds, moving like cat cows, just moving your spine, even moving your spine if you can in this posture.
And so we're really looking for ways of like, where does my body constantly feel stuck when I'm bleeding? And how can I open it up so that I can be in a more receptive state so I can receive exactly the medicine that I need so that I can learn about my deeper wirings, my deeper programmings that are revealed through my cycle, right? And so that's where like, when we do this work, like, I think it's what keeps me excited and interested because it will never be the same. Like your cycle will never be the same each time. Every spring will never be the same because there's a different set of mathematics in the sky. There's a different set of, experiences that are flowing through you into your reality. So they're always going to reflect something different. And that's why the work is never done. You're having a dynamic relationship with life. You're having a dynamic relationship with your cycle. And in this dynamism is like your ability to constantly adapt, right? To have resilience, to understand the law of impermanence, that it's constantly and constantly and constantly changing. And so you get to really figure out how to meet yourself where you are and give yourself what you need at every moment so that you can support yourself to move into these states of being that are very compassionate, very neutral, very loving, right? So that when you approach life, you're not coming from the denser emotions of resentment, of anger, of rage, of fear, of all of these illusions that we're told to believe that are misperceptions, right? Because there's only fear or love. And so really when we cultivate our menstrual practice, it's so we learn to love ourselves. And when you can learn to love yourself, you will love all things because all things are just a reflection of you. And if you don't love yourself, life will be very hard because you're going to be reflecting your inner world and it's just going to constantly show you where you're at. Right. And so that's where by you doing this work, you're showing yourself a great deal of compassion, a great deal of love. And one of the things to really know is that like you don't need to do too much in this practice, right? And so another thing that I really like to do just to stretch out my side body, you can bring one foot in to touch your pubic bone. So the foot's going to be at a 45-degree angle, 90, 0, 45, halfway, right? Right when the pubic bone is at the heel, then that foot's going to be in the right place. And sit up on enough height so that you're not sitting back on your tail, but you're actually tipping forward. You can take one block, whatever setting underneath your legs so that the knee is bent. You can take another block or two for your head. You might need two, and maybe your head doesn't even come down here because you're not there yet. That's fine. And then you'll just take your opposite hand on the knee, right? And then you're just going to bring that arm down. And if the arm doesn't come all the way down, you can just bend the knee up. You can just keep this arm straight, but eventually the arm will come all the way down. The knee will be behind the shoulder of the extended leg, its same shoulder. And then you'll extend your opposite arm up towards the sky. And so this is a really nice pose to stretch out. For me, I have my left leg forward, my left kidney, right? So my left lung. Lungs feed kidneys. And so you breathe deep into your lungs. This is going to nourish your kidneys. You're using for me, my right knee on my right shoulder to turn and look up towards the sky. Eventually, this hand will be on the foot. Your head will be on the block, and you'll just be in a little cocoon. And so this is really what it is. It's how we learn to cocoon ourselves in these practices, right? We're creating a little cocoon for ourselves so that we can do the inner work, so that we can get to know ourselves. Because the moment you turn your attention inwards, you start to realize the truths of reality, right? When we're always searching for things outside of us, thinking the world is happening to us, this is the great mistruth of reality. Nothing is happening to you. Nothing is built from outside of you, but everything is coming from within you. And so when you turn everything within you, turn your senses within, you start to learn really one of the secrets, one of the yogic skills of creating, right? Co-creating the reality that you see. Because when you're in co-creation, you realize your energy is determining what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, what you're feeling. And so you learn to cultivate your energy. Because if you don't, right, even if you do, and you're having, one of those days and like all the things are happening, you start to see it from the neutral perspective of, wow, I am creating this. What is the gold in this for me? Right, so this is a very beautiful pose. After you're done it, you can actually just turn over towards the extended leg, fit your knee in your armpit, and reach your body forwards. And so you're just kind of stretching open now the back of the left kidney. And so my knee is in my armpit, my right knee is in my right armpit. I'm just stretching my hands forward. I'm just folding over my front knee. I'll never fold over my leg with my knee not touching my armpit. So I'm not ever wanting to hunch and round my spine. I want to come forward with my front body. I want to get that knee in the armpit. And I only extend the leg as much as the knee is in the armpit. And so you never want to overstretch, right? Yoga is not about being flexible. People say it all the time. I just want more flexibility. You want more spaciousness in your body, right? Flexible people get damaged, right? People are overly flexible. They have no boundaries. Anything can come in, right? And so this practice is to learn really good boundaries, not too rigid boundaries, but the boundaries that you need to really sustain yourself, right? To have the tensile strength, to have the spaciousness, because there's no pain in space. And so after you've done that pose, you can do it on the other side. I'm not going to go through it. I'm going to let you do it. All of this to say is that there are so many ways that you can participate in the yoga practice within your menstrual cycle and shift your perception on what your cycle is, what it's showing you, what it's revealing to you, to really get to understand the nuances that are within your personal cycle, your personal lunar cycle, and how that is reflected in the collective lunar cycle. Because if you're ovulating on the full moon, right, that's going to be like the collective ovulation. And if you're doing the reverse, right, this is a different energy. And so you're more fertile when you're ovulating on the full moon because you're in the energy of the natural rhythm, right? And there's nothing saying that you can't, if you want to conceive, you can't get pregnant whenever. But when you want to, there are certain things that you can do so that you can really use the energies to your advantage so it's easier, right? And so all of this is in the feminine embodiment course. If you do want to learn more about yoga, definitely go into my virtual yoga studio. I'll also link that below. The virtual yoga studio is the place where you'll always get practices updated. Every single week, you'll get a new practice to do. You'll have the whole library of practices as we go throughout this. You'll also have a Q&A section where you can ask me these kinds of questions so that I can share with you, right? So we can build resources together, because a lot of women are going to have this question, right? And so it's really the space to get like more one-on-one with me, with my community, and to grow together, right? And that's the key, is to create a community where we're growing together, where we're evolving together, where we're using like the collective think tank to expand our awareness. So I hope you enjoyed this practice. There's so many more videos in my YouTube channel if you haven't been in here yet. More instructional videos, more philosophical videos, so there's no shortage of work to do here. So thank you all for joining me. See you in the next one.